Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos. This block is called Best Friends, 12-inch finished. Here's the diagram, and here are 4 blocks set block to block. This is a 6x6 grid, and since this is a 12-inch block, each unit in individual grid spaces finishes at 2 inches. When you look at this block, you may think it's difficult and all these triangles that you have to cut. But if you're not using AccuQuilt, we're just going to cut squares and sew from the squares to make these flying geese units. If you have AccuQuilt, you'll cut patches and just sewing the patches together. Patch A is a 2-inch finished square. We cut 2.5-inch squares and we need 8 patches. These patches go in the outside corners and then the corners inside with this small 8-point star. Patch B is a 2-inch finished half-square triangle. We cut 2 7/8-inch squares and we cut them in half once on the diagonal. That's if you want to sew patches. We'll need 16 patches of the background and 8 patches of the light fabric. These are the sky portion of the flying geese units. There are 12 flying geese units in this block. Patch C is the geese part of the flying geese units. We cut 5 1/4-inch squares, cut them in half diagonally twice for 4 patches. We'll need 8 patches of the medium color and 4 patches of the dark color. And that is these geese portion of the flying geese. Patch D is a 4-inch finished square. We cut 4.5-inch square and we need 1 patch of the light fabric, and that goes in the center star here. Here are the cutting instructions, and we're going to be making the flying geese 4 at a time. I like to cut the small squares a little bit larger to trim down the flying geese unit later. So I have the instructions if you want to do that. And that is for patch B. And patch C, which is the geese part of the flying geese, I like to make it the exact size. So here are all our squares. We just cut squares to piece this block. These are the outside little squares. This is the center square, which is the D patch. And these are the B and C patches. The large squares are the geese portion of the flying geese, and the small squares are the sky portion of the flying geese. So the first thing we're going to do is make 12 flying geese units. If you're not familiar with flying geese 4 at a time, stay tuned for a short tutorial that will show you how. For flying geese 4 at a time, you need 1 large square and 4 small squares. The large square is the geese part of the flying geese, and the small squares are the sky part of the flying geese. On the back of each of the small squares, draw a diagonal line. Place 2 of the small squares like this on the large square, right sides together. You line up these edges and make sure these lines line up. Then you're going to stitch 1/4 inch on both sides of that drawn line. Here are the 2 stitching lines on either side of the marked line, and now we cut it in half on the marked line. Now you'll open these up and press your seams open on both sides. Cut off the nubs. Now you'll place another square in this corner. Here's your diagonal line, and stitch on either side of the diagonal line. And do that for both of these. When you're stitching, your stitches should come out or start right at this point, this intersection here, this 90-degree angle. Cut this in half on the diagonal line, and you have these 2. Press your seams open and cut off your nubs. And do the same for this one. 4 flying geese. Flying geese units are all done, and I've trimmed these already. When you trim these, you'll want several things. In these corners down here, you want both of the fabrics to meet right in the corner. So here and here, as close as you can, have it split right at that corner. And then you want from this point out to the edge of the fabric, you want that to be 1/4 of an inch. For the most part, this will measure 4.5 inches after you have sewn it. So here's one we're going to trim. I'm going to put my ruler down, and I'm looking at the 4.5 inches here, and it's almost along the edge of this fabric here. I'm looking down at this corner, and I need to move it over just a little bit to make those two fabrics split right in that corner. And then I look over here, and I see that at this 4.5 inch mark, those two fabrics are pretty much splitting that corner. So there's a little bit of trimming that needs to be done here. All right, next I look down here, and I want to have the 2.5 inch mark right here. So this needs to go up just slightly. So 2.5 inch all the way across. Now I look up here, and there's my 1/4 inch, and it's right at the top of this point. So that means I'll have 1/4 inch from the point to the edge of the fabric. I'm just going to move it up just slightly. Now I'm going to trim these two sides. Okay, so now we'll turn this around, and we know this side is trimmed and this side is trimmed. So we'll put our 4.5 over here and our 2.5 down here. Then we look again at our corners, and we see it splits pretty well there, and it's almost right even with this fabric. So pretty much all we're going to cut off are these little nubs. So we'll trim this edge and this edge. And now you have your trimmed flying geese unit. So do that to all your units. Now we have everything ready, and we just need to put the block together. If we put this in the center, and this is the small star, and these go around this. Oops. Like this. And then we have our first row of the blue fabrics. So we'll piece this first, and then we'll piece the next row of flying geese units. Just treat this like a regular block. So the top units together, the middle and the bottom. Press the seams and then sew the rows together. We have the little star done, and I decided to match my stripes here. Now I'm just going to look at the diagram and finish putting the block together. Again, it's just going to be like a regular block. Sew the top units together. These middle units, you'll have to sew these flying geese to each other first, and then sew them to the middle unit, and then sew the bottom unit. Press the seams and sew the rows together. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.